and back to Atwood Afterparty. Today we'll be discussing Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale and both Atwood's techniques and its forthcoming predictions or warnings of the modern day. This dystopian novel serves as a cautionary tale for possible outcomes of an all-too-controlling regime oppressing the population, especially women. The novel follows Offred, a handmaid serving as a sex slave, and her various experiences living under the control of the Galadian government. The abuses she and her fellow women suffer bear striking resemblance to the abuses the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights attempts to mitigate. Perhaps the most obvious and regretful abuse is the neglect of Article 16, seen on screen here. It deals with the rights granted towards marriage and forming a family, aspects ignored or destroyed within the book's world. This podcast will focus on the respective techniques Atwood uses to allude towards this abuse, chief among these being narration, setting, characterization, dialogue, and imagery. Atwood's use of these techniques will be demonstrated, then a case will be made as to why it is most effective of her many techniques. We are going to start off with Joe discussing Atwood's narration.
All right, thank you. So first, we're just going to start off with some discussion on how Margaret Atwood uses her ability to narrate as a method to demonstrate the abuses Offred endures, and why her narration is the most effective technique in warning the reader of possible abuses today. First, let's start off with some explanation of what exactly narration entails. Foremost, it consists of somebody, the narrator, telling a story. In the case of The Handmaid's Tale, it is told in a second-person perspective with large amounts of both past and present narration. Second-person perspective means that the narrator, Offred, could be described as speaking to the reader as the story progresses. This gives it some interesting characteristics we will soon see. But how does this relate to the abuses of Article 16 and the similarities that we see today? Perhaps this is best seen when Offred discusses the previous interactions she and her family had with the new Gilead regime. These interactions included abuses characterized by being refused the rights to marry and found a family, something Article 16 should ensure. However, the new Gilead government actively tries to hunt them down and separate them being Offred and her husband and child. In Chapter 7, page 39, she recounts the story of when she tried to cross the border from Gilead to some other country, but they were instead chased down and permanently separated. Here's a quote on screen. It reads, "I can remember feeling quite calm. I can remember screaming. 'Where is she? What have you done with her?' 'She's in good hands,' they said, 'with people who are unfit. You are unfit, but you want the best for her, don't you?' 'You've killed her,' I said. 'She looked like an angel.'" In this quote, while there might be a healthy amount of symbolism, take care to analyze how it is all presented in a sort of unclear stupor. This is one of many flashbacks in The Handmaid's Tale, yet this one is unique in that it especially brings the reader into the text and allows one to read the quote as if they were in Offred's place. It allows one to feel what she feels. First, notice the short, concise sentences, the longest of which is only 10 words. From context, one can tell that Offred was in a state of extreme confusion and likely drugged with a kind of depressant. As such, her usually racing mind would be hampered and unable to process at the normal rate we see throughout the rest of the book. By using such short, uneasy sentences, the reader's ability to comprehend what is happening is also decreased and confusion sets in. This clearly demonstrates why narration is so effective, because it brings the reader into the story. It makes them feel a physical sensation just from reading text on a page. Rather than simply describe something with imagery or symbolism alone, narration incorporates the reader and brings them into the text. Humans are naturally sympathetic creatures. We can understand and almost feel the pains of one another. Atwood is aware of this and uses it to make the reader feel the pain Offred suffers. Narration does not build upon the world, instead it envelops the reader into it. Instead of simply explaining Offred's problem, it allows the reader to genuinely feel it. Atwood's narration brings the reader as close as possible to having a physical experience, only from reading text. Yet, Atwood does not use such clever narration to simply explain how Offred was feeling. Atwood has a goal in mind. That goal is something found in almost all, if not all, dystopian novels, a warning of a dark future that could be reality. She wants to warn the reader of the dangers of a reality in which a state splits a family and deems mothers unfit to raise their children, except we unfortunately live in that reality. The previously mentioned quote greatly mirrors today's crisis on the U.S.-Mexico border. Every day, thousands of families try to cross, yet often families can be rejected, or even worse, only some family members accepted while others are not. Naturally, this has resulted in over 1,500 minors being separated from their parents, with 545 of them still not returned in 2020. Specifically, this violates the third clause of Article 16. Instead of protecting the families, the United States government is splitting them apart. Just think about how incredibly similar this is to Offred being separated from her child. In both situations, an outside or disembodied party deems the parent unfit for the child, resulting in it being taken away. Although Mexican immigrants are presumably not being hunted down, families are still being unjustly split apart. In both cases, rather than protecting the family, it is actively hunted down and destroyed by a state deeming parents unfit for their children. Rather than taking it at face value, Atwood's narration should be taken as a warning, specifically to avoid allowing such a powerful regime from taking control and oppressing families in such a way. The message published 35 years ago now stands today, perhaps more outspokenly than ever. Now, Morgan is going to give you some background on setting and explain why she believes it is Atwood's most effective technique.
Thank you. Setting is extremely important to any novel in existence. Without setting, the whole book would be seemingly floating on a plateau of nothingness. One must build an interesting setting to build an interesting story. The setting of this novel in the terrible Gilead is no different. It even exceeds this requirement. In this society, women are governmentally oppressed and forced into relationships and jobs they do not consent to. The hierarchy of the woman branching from the wives to the aunts, the Marthas, handmaids, and then the ecno-wives. These civilians are stuck in a dystopian future in the midst of an apocalyptic-like civil war that took out their government. Atwood expertly utilizes these descriptions and context to convey how women are oppressed from being free and deciding their own relationships and family. The depiction of her intense setting serves as an unfortunate crystal ball for what today looks like, more so than any other authorial choice. To begin, I'll start with sharing a quote found on page 219 of the novel. For context, Offred is attending a pravaganza, where children are forcibly married off to older men in order to start them off early in an infertile society. The quote is as follows: "The marriages are of course arranged. Are they old enough to remember anything of the time before, playing baseball in jeans and sneakers, riding their bicycles, reading books all by themselves, even though some of them are no more than 14. Atwood describes the setting of a forgotten, non-real life by using tonally nostalgic images such as playing baseball and riding bicycles that the audience can relate to and empathize with. Through this empathetic setting, Atwood perfectly encapsulates all that these children have to miss out on due to their duties of being in arranged marriages through creating a bond with the reader, something that they can relate to. Through this relation, the reader is able to see the detrimental effects of children arranged marriages. This situation accurately predicts the horrific real-life scenario that Saida had to experience when she was just 16. According to a story done by Unchained, an organization aimed at stopping child marriages, Saida was forced to marry a family friend 3 times her age in Pakistan, where he continually abused her, physically and emotionally. The repercussions of forcing a child to marry against their will is detrimental, especially if they have to go through abuse, which can lead to lifelong trauma and developmental issues. This relates to Gilead, being that forcing these children to miss out on childhood activities as described by an imaginary setting that helps in mental development will affect them in the long run, such as Saida, who is still dealing with PTSD from this. By relating developmental problems to distant settings that these children will never see, Atwood predicts the developmental issues that Saida had by being in a child-arranged marriage against her will. Moreover, when Offred is discovering her new surroundings and her new posting, she notices how at the bottom of the stairs there's a hat and umbrella stand. There are several umbrellas in it, black for the commander, blue for the commander's wife, and the one assigned to me, which is red, which is a quote found on page 9. The connotation of the word assigned in reference to the setting of the umbrellas represents each person in this relationship, displays how Offred has been placed in this relationship against her will by a higher power which can be assumed as the government. A legal binding against Offred's will can be the definition for an arranged marriage for this example, since marriages are legal bindings. Arranged marriages being forced by a higher power is evidently predicted by Atwood in the 2020 story of child marriages in India by NPR. There is a rise of arranged child marriages in India due to the pandemic, being that Child Protective Services has limited access to these areas due to the virus. This can be related back to Offred and Atwood's setting, be that in the setting of Gilead, Gilead serves as Offred's virus. The Gileadian government is keeping Offred from being free, such as how the virus in India is keeping these children from help from CPS, showing how setting has predicted this predicament. Also, parents of these children justify their actions by saying the girl must get married now in order to save the family from dying or the economic downfall caused by the virus. This directly relates to Gilead and Offred, meaning that Gilead forces these women to have children or to save the population, similar to how these parents are forcing marriages on their children to save the family. Through the connotation of the word assigned through the setting of Offred's posting, Atwood perfectly indicates and predicts the status of arranged marriages globally in 2020. Setting is an obvious pick to how accurately Atwood predicted the future in terms of the oppression in relation to Article 16. Through imagery, they're creating an imaginary setting to depicting specific attributes in Offred's setting. It shows how evident it truly is. Now onto one of our sponsors.
Joe, did you read The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood?
Yes.
And did you use your eyes?
Yes.
Yes, and your brain as well.
Yeah.
And what about your ears?
No.
Then Audible would be a great product for you. Instead of wasting your time reading books with your hands and eyes, you can use your ears with Audible. Go to audible.com and sign up with the code Maloney. That's Maloney for 30% off your first 3 audiobooks. They're great for listening while washing the dishes or doing homework, or for those times when you literally cannot be asked to read a page of words. Once again, that is code Maloney for 30% off your first 3 audiobooks. Here is Neve with characterization.
I believe characterization is the literary technique used most effectively to predict the violations of Article 16. More specifically, characterization is used most effectively to predict the violation caused by forced arranged marriages, which are typically seen in the Middle East or in India during the year 2020. Article 16 clearly states that marriage shall be entered into only with the free and full consent of the intending spouses. Additionally, the article states that men and women of full age have the right to marry and to found a family. However, the arranged marriages in the Middle East or India are often forced and are sometimes done before the child is of full age. This is where characterization in The Handmaid's Tale comes into play. Yet, it isn't the characterization of Offred that I'll be focusing on. I will be focusing on the characterization of men as a whole, as well as the commander. Let's turn to page 210 of The Handmaid's Tale and find the quote, "You know what they were complaining about most? Inability to feel. Men were turning off sex even. They were turning off on marriage." This quote directly characterizes men as unable to feel emotion, especially the emotions that come with a relationship, such as intimacy, love, and sexual attraction. The quote also implies that the lack of feeling in men helped cause the new, forceful system of Gilead. This is suggested because without men who want to marry, there will be no marriage or religiously legal reproduction. Religiously legal meaning having kids after marriage, which is significant because of the radical religious beliefs of those who created Gilead. Thus, without consensual marriage, Gilead had to force both men and women into arranged marriages. This system is extremely comparable to arranged marriages today, if not almost the same, since they are often very forced in 2020 as well. The next quote is, "We thought we could do better. Better never means better for everyone," and can be found on page 211. The quote indirectly characterizes men as selfish because they wanted to better their own lives with arranged marriage at the price of women's lives. The idea and statement are also very, very comparable to the Article 16 violations in 2020. It is mostly comparable because some arranged marriages in the Middle East or India are meant to secure economic gain for the families or father, but at their child's expense and with the lack of consent. The next quote I am using is, "We've given them more than we've taken away," and can be found on page 219. The statement indirectly characterizes the commander as supporting Gilead and supporting the violations of Article 16, since he said this on the topic of marriage while talking to Offred about the reasons for the marriage system. Further, this compares to this perspective of fathers who marry their daughters off for financial gain for the family. They also believe that the daughter is gaining more than she is losing and that the family is gaining more than they are losing. Hence, the quote shows that the commander would likely appreciate and support the Article 16 violations seen in the Middle East and in India in 2020. The last quote was found on page 220 and says, "Arranged marriages have always worked out just as well, if not better." It directly characterizes the commander as supportive of Gilead's system for arranged marriages. This compares to the idea, found in the Middle East and in India, that arranged marriages work best for bringing benefits. Also, the context compares to the idea that love marriages are sometimes looked down upon in the two areas, the Middle East and India. This is because the context is that the commander is saying arranged marriages work better than love marriages. Therefore, the quote once again shows that the commander would be glad over the Article 16 violations. Due to all the stark similarities between Article 16 violations of arranged marriages and the characterizations of men as a whole, as well as the commander, Atwood used characterization most effectively to predict the violations of Article 16 in the year 2020. I rest my case. Next is Sean with dialogue.
So I'm going to be talking about how Atwood uses dialogue to show these abuses and violations of the Declaration of Human Rights. So the first quote that I'm using is found on page 18, where this is where Offred is first introducing the character of Nick. And she describes him by saying, quote, low status. He hasn't been issued a woman, not even one. He doesn't rate, some defect or some lack of connections. So here she's using the word issued, which is in Article 16, marriage is required to be entered into with the free and full consent of both parties. And her use of the word issued here shows that that was not the case in Gilead. To be issued a person or to have a person issued to you, it implies that there was really no choice in the matter from either party. So there is a clear violation of Article 16. And furthermore, she's referring to women and to the family unit as more of a commodity to be issued or revoked by some greater authority. And Article 16 recognizes that the family is the fundamental unit of society and is entitled to protections by the state and by society. And here, when it's treated as just sort of a commodity that can be given or taken away, that's really not protecting that family unit at all. Moving on page, in the historical notes section to paragraph 5, the professor is talking about what happened in Gilead and how Offred came to be a handmaid. And he says, quote, the regime created an instant pool of such women by declaring all second marriages and non-marital liaisons adulterous, arresting the female partners, and on the grounds that they're morally unfit, confiscating the children they already had, who were then adopted by childless couples of the upper echelons. So this again shows the breaking up of the family unit, and this is especially in violation because you're not breaking up the family unit for protection or for safety of the children or the parents, but this is for purely oppressive and utilitarian purposes, and this is being carried out by the state. So again, you see the breaking up of the family unit, and this is not contained to Gilead or to just the books, but in 2019, there was an interview published by compassion.org from a pastor in an African village in the north of Africa, who said, quote, young girls are booked by men to be married off when they're 11 or 12 years old. And this is, in this village, it's completely legal, not against the law at all, and it's being encouraged by the state or government at the time. So this is a real world violation of the Article 16 that is pretty close to what's happening in Gilead here. Because again, they have no way of giving free or full consent, especially not when they're children, and in the case of Gilead, not when they're being issued to people. So then moving on, I have one more quote, which is Serena Joy talking to Offred about the commander, and this is very early on, it's in page 22. And Serena says, quote, as for my husband, she said, he's just that, my husband. I want to make that perfectly clear. Till death do us part. It's final. So this shows that the sanctity of marriage in Gilead is still pretty similar to what it is in the real world. So if that means that the ideas of marriage and the ideas of family still exist, They're just being disregarded for the handmaids, and it's almost intentionally violating this Article 16 of free and full consent and protection of the family unit. Because had it been in Gilead, where the ideas about marriage and about family were completely different from today, then we really wouldn't be able to attest the Declaration of Human Rights to them, because that system of belief wouldn't exist. But Serena talking about till death do us part and about the sanctity of marriage, that shows us that those ideas are pretty similar. And so we can say that there's a violation of the Article 16. And like we've seen already, that arranged marriage and forced marriage is not contained to the book. An article published in 2017 by UNICEF, which is also the United Nations Children Fund, showed that 11% of women worldwide were married by the time they were 15. And in most of these cases, when the married party has no realistic way to leave the marriage, and that when they had no way of giving free and full consent to enter into the marriage, that it's no longer considered an arranged marriage or a forced marriage. At that point, it's considered to be a form of slavery, because these people have no way out, and it wasn't their choice to enter into such an arrangement. So through all of these examples, we can see that Atwood was really pretty spot on in her predictions of violations of basic human rights across Gilead and in the modern world 2020. So now on to one more word from our sponsor.
Do you love The Handmaid's Tale?
Yeah.
Do you hate reading?
Yeah.
Then get ready for The Handmaid's Tale Season 4.
Wow, where can I watch it?
On Hulu next year in 2021. Get ready to cry.
How can I watch it with no ads and without paying?
Put in code BROWN for 3 months of free watching.
Wow, thanks.
Now on to imagery with Zoe.
Images are used in literature to put the reader in the place of the character, adapting their senses as your own, which, when paired with a knowledge of the character, provides insight into the importance of the events occurring in the story. Prominent images shown in The Handmaid's Tale are used frequently to show the violations of human rights in the story. These images reflect those seen in the world in areas of human rights violations, which shows The Handmaid's Tale's predictions of such actions. In terms of Article 16 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, images can be seen to reflect the human rights violations in forced marriages. Forced marriages are a violation of the second section of the article, as it clearly states a need for consent from both participants. In The Handmaid's Tale, a prominent image used is that of the veil worn by the women who are married off to the commanders and assigned to the households to have children, which can be seen in Offred's statement of, "The dress is much like mine in shape, long and concealing, but with a bib apron over it, and without the white wings and the veil," on Atwood's page 9. Now, looking at the top countries in forced marriage, there are Niger at 76%, Chad at 67%, and Bangladesh at 59%. What these countries have in common is that their main religion is Islam. In this religion, it is common for women to wear hijabs or some type of veil. In fact, some of these countries require women by law to wear the veil in public. This similarity of imagery between places having high amounts of forced marriages and Gilead, which also has forced marriages, indicates a prediction by The Handmaid's Tale that forced marriages could be expected to occur in places with more oppressive natures towards women, which can be seen in areas where women are required to wear the veil. A second violation of Article 16 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, anticipated by The Handmaid's Tale, would be the violation of the right for gay couples to be together. The article states that men and women are allowed to marry whoever they choose, given they are consenting and of age. This would protect the rights of gay couples to be together. The Handmaid's Tale, however, violates this right in the image of the hanging of the two men on the wall described in Offred's statement of, the two others have purple placards hung around their necks. Gender treachery. Caught together they must have been, on page 43. This statement informs the reader that the men were hanged for being caught together in a gay relationship, though through their description on the plaque, which is protected by Article 16. The depiction of the hanging of the gay men is a violation of the article as it punishes the freedom of love. This is reflected today by the recent proposal to repeal gay marriage in America. This violation was proposed and justified by religious values, saying that gay marriage is frowned upon by the Christian Bible, and thus it should not be permitted. Following the new conservative addition to the Supreme Court justices, the proposed repeal of gay marriage has been taken more seriously. So the image of gay men being hanged serves as a warning for the violation of such rights, and can be seen to be a prediction for the current violation of this article. This shows the effectiveness of images in The Handmaid's Tale in giving warnings of the modern day.
The evolution of human rights has been an unfortunately slow process for many societies around the world. Some haven't even been able to be guaranteed, such as Article 16 in some societies, for example, the Middle East. Atwood's novel The Handmaid's Tale, which I'm sure you're very familiar with by now, perfectly, almost scarily predicts the struggle and oppression of many people around the world in 2020 through her use of building an intriguing narration, creating a terribly shocking setting, beautiful use of characterization, captivating use of dialogue, and beautiful use of imagery. Each one serves their purpose in showcasing the very real struggles so many victims have to deal with, even in 2020. Some may have been more impactful than others, but that's up to you to decide.